Good morning. We are ready to start our second keynote. Again, thank you all for, man, these are bright. Thank you all for coming out. My name is JC, and I am very pleased to introduce Snow. Hang on. We'll do it one more time. I'm very pleased to introduce Snow. There it is. All right, now we're waking up. So, I am extremely privileged to introduce Snow because I know a little bit about her. We've been working together professionally for about 12 years now. Hang on, I got some more notes. Yeah, I'm not a smart guy. There we go. Yeah, 12 years. 2006. We've been married for what? 18 years? 16 years? Somewhere in there. We've been together for 23 years. I know that, 23 years. So we've known each other for a bit. I watched Snow build her career in this industry, coming from special effects makeup, winning black badges at DEF CON, SAINTCON, another con. She's got a collection of these things now. She also did something very cool with me this year. We're gluttons for punishment, so if you've seen the Vault here at SAINTCON, that's our baby. That's something quite behemoth this year. However, we've also this year started the social engineering community at DEF CON this year. That was something. I don't know what we're going to do to top ourselves next year. But she is the global head of innovation and delivery at IBM X-Force. She's also their chief people hacker. She runs two roles, running essentially a way to improve their business, but also leading their social engineering engagements. That includes over 130 physical security assessments in her career without ending up in handcuffs. There's only been, I believe, one that she's told me about that had law enforcement involved. Big Disney fangirl. We're going to Disney next January. She has been an absolute, how do I put this without making you cry? Inspiration to see her build this career and get to where she is in 12 years. Absolutely mind-blowing. And I am excited to hear what she's put together for your keynote. So without further ado, I will pass the mic to Snow. Go ahead and play the soundtrack that she's got to cue up as you take the stage. Soundtrack.
This is a surprise to me.
A round of applause, Snow.
Okay. There is no soundtrack, right? Just making sure. I don't know if I'm waiting for something. Okay. All right. The year is 2019, and I just broke into a very famous, everyone here has probably heard of it, building, very secure, all the bells and whistles building. I was on cloud 9. I didn't think I could do it. And now I have to go present my findings to the security team. So I'm at their office, in their headquarters, in a boardroom, with a bunch of people and me. I have my slide deck ready. I have all the ways I broke in, suggestions for mitigation, all this stuff. I'm ready. I start my slides, and I start talking. The CISO cuts me off mid-sentence, and he says, very frustratedly, "You have been doing this, and you have been successful doing this for the last few years now. Why are you always successful? What are we doing wrong?" Right? I didn't even get through the presentation. He is just so upset. What are we doing wrong? So I went up to the whiteboard, and I wrote this. If you do not know what this number is, you will by the end of this presentation, of this keynote. But I will tell you exactly what I told him at the end. So keep this number in mind as we move forward with this presentation. All right, so I am Snow. I'm so glad to be here today and talk with you all in this crazy filled room of people. It's so exciting to see how much SAINTCON has grown over the years. So I have a question for everyone, and the question is, who here is afraid of being a target in a social engineering attack? Show of hands. Okay, who's lying? Right? I'm afraid of being a target in a social engineering attack. Right? There's so many attacks that are happening nonstop. And it's just insane. So I want to take a look at some of the data behind this and how successful social engineering has been in our industry. I don't know who here is a data nerd, but that is 100% me, so I like looking at the numbers. I can tell you stories, and I'm going to tell you stories. Jason told you stories. Deviant is full of stories as well of how we've been successful. But let's look at some of the proof in our industry. 41% of attacks started with phishing for the initial access. That is huge. I mean, it's followed up by like cloud misconfigurations and smaller things like that. But that is a huge number. Phishing is still so relevant. This number isn't fluctuating. It's staying the same. All right, so we know it's important. It's happening a lot. How much does it cost an organization if they get breached? Sorry, this slide's a little bit small, but a lot of these things are social engineering, and this is measured in the millions of dollars, right? So when we're looking at phishing, $4.91 million is the average cost it costs an organization when they have to deal with a data breach, when phishing's involved. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. Okay, so we know that it happens often. It's costing us a lot of money. Oh, but employees aren't really helping. They're not reporting it, right? Only 15% of people report suspicious emails. That number is way, 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 way too low. It's insanely low. 15% of people are just reporting it. That means the other ones are falling for it, they're ignoring it, they're not doing anything with it. It's really, really scary. So I want you to think about something for a second, okay? I want you to take a minute to think about how we are currently mitigating social engineering attacks, right? What are things that we're doing? Security awareness training, right? Everyone here, well, not everyone here, I should say, a lot of compliance frameworks require it, so we're having to do it. Raise your hand if you are not doing security awareness training. I think I see one hand. Thank you for your honesty. 2 hands. So everyone here is doing security awareness training, but is it working? Multi-factor authentication. We will talk about this later, right? This is one of the ways a lot of people suggest mitigating social engineering attacks. Secure email gateway. How many folks have that set up, right? There's a lot of companies that are doing this now. Lots of them. Show of hands, how many organizations have secure? Okay, are you guys just like lying to me, or does nobody seriously have this? We have things like web filters, right? So people can actually reach malicious websites. We have things like physical access controls, so to hopefully stop people from getting into our organizations. And we even have things like voice recognition software. Does anyone here work at a call center by chance? No? So a lot of call centers are starting to adopt this, which is really cool to see, unless you're an attacker like myself, then it sucks. Just a quick story here. I was on an engagement where I had to call a call center, and within 2 minutes of me being on the phone and talking to this person, this call rep, they knew I wasn't the person I was impersonating because they had voice recognition software. Pretty crazy stuff, how fast that can pick up on that. All right. So I want to go into story time. I want to tell you some of the stories where I've been successful in ways that those mitigation steps should have stopped me. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about as I'm going through and telling you these stories is think about what solutions or anything you have in place in your organization that should stop social engineering as I'm telling these stories. So the first thing I want to talk about, and JC mentioned it, is the social engineering community. We were super excited to do it this year. At DEF CON was our first year. We took over the village and I'm very, very excited. Show of hands, who actually went to DEF CON this year? Okay, did anyone actually stop in the village? All right, just a couple. I highly recommend going next year. It is a lot of fun. So just kind of high level how the village works is we have a bunch of different events and a competition. So for the events, we have a research, we have a youth event, we have cold calls. So people just don't want to show up and make a call. They get in our soundproof booth, which I'll show a picture here in a second. And as soon as they get in the booth, they get their target and the goals that they're supposed to get. So it's things like, what kind of antivirus do they use? Really, really interesting to listen to those calls. Here's actually a picture of the booth. So this picture was from our competition, which is the vishing competition. How the competition works is we have pre-selected contestants, and they're given a list of objectives. Now, those objectives range crazy from the operating system they use to do they have anti-tailgating signs up. And so the competition works in two phases. The first phase, is all remote. So they have their objectives and their target company, and then they get to go and do research. Can they find those flags, those objectives, online, right? And then they write it up and they get points for it. Now, the exciting part is when they show up to DEF CON, to our village, and they sit in the soundproof booth, just like you can see here in the picture. She's kind of in that corner. And then on the projector screens is the cameras of this contestant. And then they place live phone calls in front of this audience to try to get those questions answered from their target. Very terrifying. I know from experience, it is not fun to try to elicit things from people while having an audience. So one of the questions or the objectives that we have is, do they use security awareness training? And a follow-up question is, what do they think about it? Now, the reason we had that objective is kind of for a couple reasons. And we want to kind of trip them up a little bit. We want to give the target on the phone a little bit of a win, possibly, right? If I tell you, and I'm going to use a JC analogy here, if I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, what are you going to do? You're going to think of the pink elephant, right? So if we ask you, oh, are you taking security awareness training? That's supposed to put it on the front of their mind. That's supposed to be what they start thinking about. They're supposed to start thinking of red flags. However, that's not what happened. People were like, oh yeah, we take security awareness training, and they would go on to describe it without even being asked. Yeah, we know if someone calls and asks for my credit card information or my username and password, I'm supposed to hang up immediately. That is a bad guy. That's a scammer. They're telling to the phone, to the person who is getting information from them. They're not asking them for credit card information. They're not asking them for their username and password. They're asking them for things like, do you badge into your office? Do you have Windows? Things that might seem innocuous. However, if we have all these little bits and pieces of information, that can help us with our attack later on. Things that they should not be giving anyone who's calling them that's not verified yet. So it's a very interesting thing that we were able to find. Actually, one of the calls, the person went on to say, yeah, we actually keep a key under the lock, right? Terrifying things that you should not be telling someone who's not verified. But they all said they took security awareness training when they were asked. They didn't see any red flags. They even went on to say, yeah, they didn't see red flags because the caller wasn't asking for credit card information or a username and password. So what happened here? Security awareness training failed, right? They had just enough training where they memorized those little bits and pieces, right? They knew that a password and a credit card information was a red flag, but they didn't realize the other pieces that should have been a flag, right? So an issue here is security awareness training. As much as we preach people need to take it, it is not covering everything that attackers are doing. In that hour, when you talk about phone calls and all you say is don't give someone your password, that's it. I don't ask people for passwords on phishing assessments, never. I don't do that because I know it's covered, but there's so many other things I do. So when you sit there and you look at security awareness training, you really need to evaluate what it's covering for our users. What are they actually learning? All right, so I have another story here about phishing. So the client was a Fortune 500 company, and they wanted to have us sample a random selection of people in various departments, right? Just get a good sample. So we did OSINT. We found a couple subdomains they used, and when we viewed those subdomains, we found what the portals looked like. Cool. So we buy a typo squatted domain, so a domain that looked very similar to the one that they were used to using. For an example, if a company uses vpn.company.com, we'll buy something like vpn-company.com. It's very easy to oversee, and it works very, very well. Get our phishing website set up. It looks exactly like the one that they're used to seeing. We send off our campaign. So in the last story, security awareness training, it failed. But this time it worked. Someone reported the phish, which is great, right? However, the junior SOC analyst who was reviewing that report said, oh, it has an SSL cert. Oh, it looks legit. And they removed it from quarantine. And they let it out. So while security awareness training worked, we still had some other failures, right? We didn't have a properly trained SOC analyst, or we didn't have any IR playbooks, right? We talk about security awareness training for the everyday user, but what about training the people in these security roles, right? What does that actually look like? When was the last time you've evaluated what their training was and even tested them on it? How about take a sample of the things that they've reviewed to make sure it's correct? We're not doing that. Let's talk about playbooks. If you don't have them, get them. If you do have them, test them. How do you know something works if you don't test it? You can have all the documentation in the world, but without going through the steps to make sure it works, it's pointless. All right, another phishing story. I love phishing. Okay, so this one begins with the kickoff call. So we're talking to the CISO and we're asking, what are your goals for this test? Right, what do you want us to do? And he said, well, we feel pretty secure, right? We have MFA, we have password managers. I don't really think we have a big risk when it comes to phishing. Okay, so challenge accepted. So the goals that we decided were, one, to see if we can get a set of credentials and then try to reuse them on a different portal that they had, a different type of service they had. So, being the challenge excited people that me and my team were, we wanted to see what we can do. So we dug into OSINT, and we decided, okay, let's first go for their accounts with MFA. We have a framework we can use to capture those credentials and the token and get access, right? He thinks that's foolproof. Let's see what we can do. And then let's have a backup list of websites and portals that their employees log into to see if we can reuse those passwords. So we did our research. We did tons of OSINT. On LinkedIn, we found an employee who talked about just setting up MFA on their Office 365. And so we're like, perfect, Office 365 phish, let's go. And so what we did is we sent out that phish, and before we sent it out, we had a list of other services we were going to try to plug any credentials in. Again, he was very confident. We were somewhat nervous, but really excited to try it. And it took about 8 hours before that MFA phish worked. Right? We used a service called Evil Jinx or Evil Nginx, which if you haven't heard of, please go look it up, especially if you think that you are safe from phishing because of MFA. So what happened was the employee logged in, then they were prompted for their TOFA code, they supplied it, and then we were in. We were able to capture that session and then use it. And we still had their credentials. So we took those credentials and we plugged them into a list of different services that they had. And I think on the fourth one, we were able to get in. Again, he said we weren't going to be able to get in because of MFA and because of them having a password manager. So when we had a wrap-up call and we're explaining everything that happened, he's like, I don't get it. Like, this should have worked, right? We explained how the MFA attack worked. He's like, okay, I get it, but the password manager thing is still driving me nuts. We gave all of our employees password manager access a couple months ago, but someone's still reusing their credentials. Like, I don't get it. And we asked, well, what kind of education did you give around password managers? And he's like, well, none. So what happened was this employee is using password manager, but they had the same password in for every single login that they had without them knowing. And that's not their fault. We cannot blame our user for that, right? For us, it's like, oh, well, that's stupid. Like, it's easy to think that, but no, it's not. They had no idea. They thought it was a place where they were supposed to put their username and password, and they did exactly what they were told. Exactly what they were told. We didn't make it clear. That organization didn't make it clear. They didn't provide any training on how to actually use a password manager. They just assumed. So what went wrong here? Right? Lack of specific training. They launched a new tool, a new product, and they didn't train anyone on it. They didn't have any policies around it. And then the misunderstanding of MFA. So let's talk about MFA for a second. MFA is great for what it was originally intended for, which is stopping attacks where the attacker tries to reuse your username and password, right? Those compromised credentials, but they don't have a channel to the victim. So they're able to find your credentials on the dark web, data breaches, wherever they have those, and they plug them in somewhere, and then they get that prompt for two-factor code. If they don't have a channel to the victim, then it stops it. It's great. However, when we as an attacker are able to control that channel, right? I send out the phishing campaign, I'm controlling it, and then I'm also controlling that prompt for the two-factor, it doesn't work. It's broken. That's something we have to look in the mirror and face. We say MFA is the saving grace, but it's not. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying you have to really think about how it works before we recommend it as a tool that's going to save everything. All right, let's talk about vishing or voice phishing. So this campaign, the goal was to elicit sensitive information from our target. And when I say sensitive information, I mean the type of browser they use, the version of the browser, right? We want to see if anything's out of date, what type of antivirus they use. Because what we were doing on this campaign is we were taking all the information and then we were feeding it to the red team so they can build customized payloads and do further testing from there. A lot of times we work with other groups like that. And social engineering is a perfect way to get information from people. So we call our employee, we go through our regular spiel. Okay, I'm calling from IT, we're doing up XYZ. And the employee's like, oh, wait. I have to call you back to verify you. I'm confused. Like, okay, so we give her a number. 30 seconds later, she calls back. She's like, okay, it's you. We're like, yeah, it's me. It's still me. And she still gives us all the information. Has anyone here heard of a callback verification policy? Show of hands. Just a couple hands. I'm surprised it's not a little bit more. So how it works is if someone calls you and you can't verify who they are, especially if they're saying they're from IT or asking for sensitive information, how the policy is supposed to work is you say, okay, let me get your information so I can verify you. They hang up. They actually verify them, right, through their manager, through whatever channels they have. And then if it's legit, they call them back, which I'm assuming most times it's not legit. However, this employee didn't understand the policy. She just thought that she had to get the phone number of the person calling and call them back. This is another example of broken policies or policies that aren't tested. We can have all the policies that would in an ideal world make us secure, but if we're not testing them or seeing if our users actually understand them, what's the point? It's just words on paper. We also had security awareness failure here as well, right? Because we weren't asking for a password, we weren't asking for that credit card information. She didn't see any red flags. She thought she was following our policy, but she still gave us tons of information. All right, let's move on to a physical. So this physical took place in New York. Our client had just leased a brand new building, and they wanted to test security, right? They had all the bells and whistles. They spent tons of money on all these access control systems. They used the building security guards. They bragged about them being undercover armed guards, which was kind of scary. But we still tested it, right? And so as we're going through and we're doing our OSINT, before we even show up on site, right, just like Jason talked about in his talk earlier, right, he wants to find the badges, he wants to look at the floor plans, all these things. Well, we also found something on the property management website. They had an application to fill out for visitors to get a badge. I don't mean like a web application, I mean like a form. All you had to do is print it, fill it out, and they're supposed to give you a guest badge. So I'm like, okay, let's test this. Print it out, fill it out, show up to the guard, and in my mind I was thinking, okay, in an ideal world, he would have a point of contact that he would need to call down from the building, they would have to escort me, all these steps, but I still had to try it. Not one question. He looked at the form and gave me a guest badge. As I was walking around the building on the client site, I was able to use my RFID credential stealing device. So I had my purse, and you can't even see it, and I got close enough to a handful of employees where I was able to get their badge credentials, and I made a copy of my own. And I was able to use that same card that I made a clone of for an entire week, getting in and out of the building, not being questioned once, showed up multiple times a day. Let's talk about how some of these things were broken. They didn't have an RFID passback policy. Has anyone ever heard of that before? So let me explain what it is. So when you badge into a building, the system says, okay, cool, Stephanie badged in, and that's it. Now, if I'm an attacker and I steal Stephanie's credentials and I use it, the system just thinks, oh, Stephanie keeps badging in. However, if there's an anti-passback policy, there would actually have to be something where the person would have to badge out from the secure side. So they know, okay, Stephanie's inside. Oh, Stephanie badged out, so Stephanie can't be inside. And if that's the case, and I have those stolen credentials on a badge, and I try to badge in, but the person's already in, it won't let me. It's little policies like that that go such a long way. There's so many times they see clients that spend so much money. It's insane how much money on all these products and services, but they're not configured properly. Or it's just a little extra step that would have stopped me from getting in the rest of the week. Let's also talk about third-party risk management. We have like your landlords or any service providers. There's sometimes risk, or there's risk when you're utilizing someone else's stuff. Why are you not testing it? You're just trusting it. All right, so those are some stories how I've been successful. Myself, Jason, Deviant, we can probably spend the entire week talking about these stories. But I've also seen stories, I've had experiences where I have been stopped, which has been honestly a breath of fresh air. So not everything, this is a phishing story, excuse me. So the goal of this campaign was to send out an email to 100 people to see how many people gave us their username and password. And so we send it out, and the way I send phishing campaigns, I send about a 2 to 5 second delay in between every single email. Because sometimes if you send out 100 at once, the filters are going to be like, oh, this looks sketchy. We're going to quarantine it, which I don't want. So I have a delay in those emails. One of the very first people that received it reported the phish. Within 5 minutes, the SOC found it, they quarantined it, they shut down the entire campaign before all of the emails even sent. I wasn't shocked. That has never happened to me before. So why was this successful? And I asked my client, okay, this is great. What's going on? He's like, well, we invest a lot into our security. He's like, but we don't call it security awareness training. That's a word we do not use, that phrase, at all. It is security awareness culture. We have built it from the top down. It's important to our leadership. Every time the CEO gets on an all-hand calls once a quarter, he brings up how important security is, so everyone hears it from him. Isn't that really cool to think about? It's a culture. It's not just a training that we dread once a year. It's a part of who they are. And on top of that, the user, right? They knew how to report. That's something else Jason talked about I thought was fantastic. We can spend all this time educating people, but if they see something suspicious and they don't know how to report, they're not going to do it. This user knew exactly how to report, and the SOC was on their A game. This was such a win. I love it. All right, I have another story. So this story comes from a call that I witnessed years ago in the SC Village at DEF CON. So how it worked was the social engineer, they were calling their target and they were going through their spiel, right? I'm this person calling from this company, I need this information. They were pretending to be someone from IT. And their target goes, whoa, you didn't give me the code. What code? Like once a week, we get a code from IT that they say before they call and ask us for information. That's kind of cool. I've never seen that before, heard it. It stopped the social engineer in their tracks. They didn't have the code. They didn't know what to say. It's all because the company that they were calling, they took a chance on change. They did something outside of the box. This isn't something that I've ever heard or seen before, yet it worked. And it's something I really encourage you all to think about, is doing things that are outside the box. All right, enough about stories for a second. Let's talk about numbers and do some math. Wow, y'all look like about ready to fall asleep. No math. Okay. The average employee works about 40 hours per week. Salary employee. There are 52 weeks in a year. So far, does my math check out? Okay, cool. All right, so 40 hours a week times 52 weeks is 2,080 hours. However, we're kind of nice. Let's figure we give our salary employee 4 weeks off for holidays, for PTO, for sick time, what have you. So that's 160 hours. So if we take the 2,080 hours and subtract their time off, the 160, we get a total of 1,920 hours. Is everyone following so far? Kinda? Okay. 1 hour of a year is dedicated to security awareness training. Remember that number that are on the board? 1 is 0.05% of 1,920. That's less than 0.5%. Yet we're expecting these employees to stop all of these attacks that they're getting. But we're only investing less than 1% into them for security awareness training. This number should make you feel sick to your stomach. This is not okay. Yet, when you think about social engineering as an issue, you always say, oh, security awareness training is the answer. You're telling me this is the answer to stop these type of attacks? Right? Spending all this money, $4.91 million, but we're only investing 0.5% into training our employees. No wonder why this is 15%. I'm surprised it's not lower. This number is not okay. Now, I'm not saying double down on security awareness training and keep doing the same awful training that they're getting, right? When we're looking at phishing and vishing, the training that I've seen that's covered, it doesn't cover any of the tactics I use, any of them. Why are we relying on vendors? Why aren't we challenging vendors? Can we roll our own training? Maybe. depending on your company. Why is it not impactful? Why are they not understanding? This number is so low, we have to do something different. We have to. Or that 41%, that $4.91 million, that 15%, those numbers aren't going to change. If anything, they're probably going to get worse because attackers are still using social engineering. They're not going to stop. Why would you? You're doing something that's working. And if that number still remains 0.05%, it's going to keep working. So I challenge you to do something different, right? Look at that company that decided to come up with a code word. They did something outside of the box, right? Increase the amount of time that you invest into your employees to stop these attacks. Do some training yourself if you can, right? If the vendors that you're paying are not doing enough, see if you can do your own. Or do an augment, do your own in addition to theirs. Look at the attacks that are actually happening against your organization and train your employees to stop those attacks. Because I'm not calling asking for credit card information. I'm calling and asking them to click a link and put their credit card information in, put their username and password in. I'm finding ways outside that, and that's what attackers are doing too. I hope you take this challenge. Now, one of the things I want to talk about really fast is push notifications for MFA. All right, has anyone actually gotten a push notification? They're that close to each other. I've accidentally denied myself 100 times, right? If we look at the Uber attack, has everyone here heard of the Uber attack that's been in the news recently? Yeah, this is what happened. The attacker, right, they had those username and passwords, and all they did was they spammed the push notification until the employee hit accept. This is something I strongly disagree with. While I'm for MFA, I know it's not 100% solution, I am very against push notifications. If you're using this organization, I really encourage you to look into it and consider different types of options for MFA. Because push notifications, way too many mistakes, and attackers are now starting to take advantage of it. It's something that we've been taking advantage for years. All right, I went fast. I'm very excited that I was able to share that. Hopefully I encouraged you all, I challenged you all, because that 0.5% number, it's not okay. We can do better. All right, thank you all.